in the land of Arcanosa, animals, plants, and all forms of living matter carry within themselves the essence. This mysterious energy seems to grow within all beings, and is a measure of and linked to their vitality and health. Most living beings can share or give away their own life essence, in a process known as dispersal. Yet a few species have evolved to interact uniquely with this energy. They can use it in various ways, whether given freely in a mutualistic relationship, or taken by force as parasites or predators. Regardless, this evolutionary path comes with a heavy toll, for in exchange, the species permanently loses the ability to replenish life essence on its own, and without a host to leech, they fail to reproduce, wither, and die. One of such beings is the Jacobsa, the grasper, the plant that hunts, soul sucker, man-eater. These are but a few names by which the people of the Senshavan Commonwealth oft named the essence vines in times of old. It may surprise the listener that these now ever-present plants, which power the Commonwealth's war machines, industry, and even prosthetics, were once a much despised and greatly feared pest. For the wild Jacobsa is a vicious predator that begins its life innocuously enough. As it sprouts, it looks for a tree or other such structure to support itself as it grows, like any other vine or liana. As it reaches maturity, the vine will develop a large flower at its upper end, which hangs down from its support and blooms. After it's been pollinated, this flower undergoes a drastic transformation, as its petals morph into sensory tendrils that can detect and follow traces of life essence, like a creepy sunflower. It lays in wait, dormant, until it detects a victim of the appropriate size nearby. Then the plant lunges, using its essence-powered muscles to detach and launch itself from the tree it had been perching upon. The sensory head attaches to the fur or skin of its victim with tiny hook-like prickles in its tendrils, and the rest of the plant begins to coil around it. This usually causes its victim to panic and run, as the Jacobsa tightens its hold and begins draining it. It is not a quick death, for the vine seeks not to kill, but to obtain as much life essence as it can. A fierce fight for life ensues, as the prey attempts to free itself from the vine's grasp. Humans in a group or with sharp tools may escape it, but most times the victim, exhausted and weakened, succumbs to exhaustion, thirst, or opportunistic predators. It is at this point that the vine enters the last phase of its life, as the sensory head forms a noxious bulb, and within it, buckets of seeds full of stolen essence. These then sprout in the nutrient-rich environment created by the rotting corpse that was their mother's prey, and the cycle begins anew. The Jacobsa was so feared that it became extinct in many areas, where humans burned or cut them down on sight. However, for a particular tribe, they became a valuable tool, for the Bohun, a monastic people, had long believed that the key to enlightenment and understanding of the universe was to understand the essence, which they called Atar. And so to better contemplate its mysteries, they sought to meditate on a severely essence-deprived state, focusing on inner awareness while they regained their life's spirit, trying to sift cosmic and self-understanding truths from the deliriums of madness that an almost fatal lack of life essence brings. The Bohun had come into Semuria after being persecuted and chased away from their homelands in the far west, and at first were tolerated by the local nobility and allowed lands to settle in exchange for a sizable portion of their crops and produce. In the hidden wilds of their new home, they found the Jacobsa and became fascinated by it. So the Bohun took the wild plant and, in search of insight, used it as a way to attain the state of deep meditation and sometimes as a disciplinary tool. Over time, the monks began to raise their own varieties of the plant and slowly weeded out its most undesirable traits, like its attempts to throttle its host. During this process, they discovered that by willingly dispersing their atar into the vine, they could make it move, contract, and expand, with a force that belied its size, and so the relationship with the plant began to shift. The monks bred some strains of the Jacobsa until it had been fully tamed, so it would stay completely dormant unless actively fed essence by its host. And as the vine was domesticated, so did the Bohun's mastery of it grow. to the point they achieved full and precise control of its strength, as yet another limb. And as this skill was practiced in preparation for the deep meditation, mastery of the bind acted as a mark of asceticism and seniority among the monks. Thus the Jagopsa became not just a means for draining their own essence, but a useful tool in daily life, and even a weapon in times of need. This was an extremely difficult art that has been mostly lost in favor of the more modern bindplate arrangements. But in those times, this was a great novelty, as magic to the uninitiated. So as their mastery of the bind grew, so did the reputation of the Bohun as potent wizards and mystics, wise and benevolent custodians of secret lore and the mysteries of life. Since they sought to constantly deprive themselves of their essence in order to deepen their understanding of it, they would disperse it to the lands around them and freely share it with any sick or feeble person who was brought to them, making the landscape around their communities bloom, rich with the bounty of nature, and gaining them much favor with their peasant neighbors. Thus their philosophy of humility, community, and detachment from the material and even from one's own life force spread and grew, with new monasteries dotting the vast lands of Semuria, and new acolytes flocking to them in droves. This caused the great lords of the land to become greatly resentful of the Bohun, whose growing influence threatened established religions upon which their rule was based. They feared their swelling numbers, which came from their own peasantry, and their mastery of this strange new plant. And so, a rare peace among the great houses was agreed on, and the proclamation of Verencia was announced, calling for a holy war to destroy the Bohun, labeling them as heretics. The monks defended themselves bravely and fiercely, often joined by peasants of the regions they inhabited, in open rebellion and rejection of the dictates of Verencia. Yet, after months of fighting, the peasantry was crushed, and the Bohun were almost eradicated. Their order all but destroyed. A few monks managed to escape the purges, and, looking for ways to survive and reintegrate to Semurian society, came to hide amongst the crowds of the great cities. They would trade with their skills in the use and breeding of the Jagopsa, and eventually, forming their own guilds for such a purpose, lost their philosophy and identity in the process. This would lead to the creation of the first bind-powered machines, which came to be known as bindworks. Among them, more powerful trip hammers that required no water wheel to function, and allowed the fast forging of heavier metal plates than ever before, and even the first bindplate prosthetics to replace limbs often lost in war. Now fully under control of the aristocracy, and not promoting an alternative that undermined their authority, they were once again tolerated, nay, welcomed by the powerful, for their trade brought innovation to their domains, and taxes. Eventually, this would lead to the creation of the first mechs, bind-powered giants that demanded great quantities of essence, and which would forever change the face of war in Semuria, and bring forth unforeseen economic and social repercussions. And so it was that a plant, once considered a pest and a threat, became embedded in almost every aspect of life in Semuria, and it was to play an inextricable role in its violent transition into the Senshevan Commonwealth. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another time. Hello! Thank you for watching till the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are feeling a bit lost, I recommend watching this video next, as it explains the essence in more detail, and others in the channel if you'd like to see more Binds of War. And special thanks to the amazing Patreons that support this project, thanks to whom I was able to license music for this video, and whose support will further help improve future content. I have much more in the works, but in the meantime, consider joining our Discord, which has grown into quite a nice art/world-building community, and is the best place to ask any questions you may have about Binds of War, or just to share art and thoughts with like-minded folk. In any case, thanks again, and hope to see you around. Cheers!